Welcome everybody to tonight's shmooze. We want to start off with a wish for a full shlema, for a speedy recovery for Yecheskel ben Edith, who has a connection to our relative and one of our regulars coming here. We hope he has a speedy recovery. Yecheskel ben Edith. So I think tonight is going to be finish the holy book of Chavetz Chaim. We learned it very superficially, but I think we got a good idea of it, the Chavetz Chaim. And I hope that you'll be able to study it inside with all the details. You'll find it very interesting. But we went over it, basically the main general rules of speaking Lashon Hara. And we'll wind it up tonight. And next week I hope to start a different sefer, different book that you'll find very interesting. I'm not sure yet which one. I think maybe we'll study the Rambam and some of his great writings. But to wrap up the last laws, we're concentrating on last week. If you see somebody doing something negative to somebody else, saying something, embarrassing him, stealing from him, then damaging him, under certain circumstances, it's permitted to tell other people about it, even though it's Lashon Hara. And the reason being to people to hear that if you wrong somebody else, you'll have to suffer the consequences. People will talk against you. They'll have bad feelings to the person who did it because they're talking about him. So people take from that. I don't want to be in the mouth of people. I won't do bad to others because I don't want people to talk badly about it. Even maybe you might get the person to himself to do the right thing, to return what he took, or to ask forgiveness for what he did, for what he said. So that's why here we're more easygoing with Lashon Hara between man and man in order to rectify what was done wrongly. And he gave many conditions about that, among them that you have to know for sure that's true, not from hearsay. You're not allowed to exaggerate more than it is, and you have to think it's only for a purpose of helping, not that you want to enjoy talking against somebody else. We mentioned these details that are necessary to permit us to talk Lashon Hara against somebody else who wronged somebody else. And he's saying to the Chavetz Chaim that if this is the fact, then it's permitted to talk against the person even though he didn't ask you to. You know that it happened, and you're sticking up for him and telling people, you know what he did to him? He embarrassed him in public, and he goes around telling people about it. Even though the person was embarrassed, didn't ask him to do it, you're allowed to do it anyway. Because of the reason we mentioned before, people should feel they can't get away with doing wrong to other people. They can't embarrass people. They're going to pay the price for it. People can go around talking against them, and they shouldn't think they have a free ticket. I'll go do what I want. You can't speak against me. It's Lashon Hara. Oh no, not in the case like this. It's permitted to. People make a mistake, the Chavetz Chaim, sometimes when you see a relative of yours that you think he was wronged by somebody else, and relatives tend to be very upset about their own kin, their own relatives who were wronged, and they go around and talk against them, and they're not careful to make sure that all of the details of permission were existing at the time. They just might be hearsay. They heard that they did something to his relative. He's not sure. He didn't see it himself. And whatever details might be missing, you have to be careful. Even though it's your relative, you have to keep the guidelines that we said before to make sure that it's true. You know that you saw it by yourself. You can't exaggerate. You have to go first and tell the person and mention to him, why did you do that? You have to give him a chance to answer himself before going and talking again. even if it's a relative, all these guidelines we mentioned before are relevant. Now, an important thing over here is that so far we only permitted a different person to talk against the person who was wronged. Let's say Reuven saw that Shimon was embarrassed by Levi. Levi embarrassed Shimon, and Reuven was present at the time. So we say that Reuven is allowed to go around and tell people, do you know what Levi did? He embarrassed Shimon. But Shimon himself, the person who was wrong, cannot go around telling people what was done wrong to him. Because the person himself is very upset, and we're afraid that he's going to talk against the other person because he's angry at him to get him back. And that you're not allowed to do. We said before, the only heter, the only permissible way to talk against somebody who did something wrong, if you have in mind for a benefit to come out of it. Not because you want to get the other person, not because you want to get him back or you enjoy speaking Lashon. It has to be, you're doing it for a purpose of something positive to come out of it. But a person, Shimon, who was embarrassed, and he goes and says, you know what he did to me? Usually the person saying that is not because he wants the justice to be done. He wants to get back at Levi for embarrassing him. So that is not permitted for the person himself who was embarrassed, who was wrong, for him to go around telling people what happened to him. That's Lashon Hara. You're not allowed to do that. Unless, the Chavetz Chaim says, there is an exception to that. If he feels by telling somebody he'll be able to retrieve the thing that was taken from him. If somebody stole from him something, and you go and tell people, no, he stole from me, and you are in power, you have influence on that person, go speak to him and tell him to give it back to me. In a case like that, where you might be able to benefit but by telling somebody else what happened, even the person himself who was wrong, there's a lot to tell the other person, somebody else, in order to the wrongdoing to be rectified. But it's only in order, if he embarrassed me, you can't get him to return anything if you're embarrassed. That's things, only if you expect to get something back monetarily was taken away from you, and by telling somebody maybe you'll get it back, then it's permitted. But for other purposes, the person himself who was wrong is not allowed to tell anybody. It's only a third person who was witnessed what happened. He's allowed to tell other people what happened. It's a little complicated. I hope you're able to follow. Or, he says, let's say first went to a certain city, a village, and they weren't so nice to him. He came into the shul, he came into wherever it is, and people weren't nice to him. They didn't give him a place to eat, didn't a place to sleep. He had who knows what. He had to sleep in the shul that night. They weren't nice to him. He's not allowed to go around telling you, know that city, the terrible people in that city, they don't know how to treat guests. I was there, and they didn't invite me, and they didn't give me a proper treatment like people should. You're not allowed to speak against a person himself, even the private person. Certainly not allowed to speak against the whole city. Whatever the reason is, what's true, it's not true, but that's Lashon Hara. There's no purpose, there's nothing good that's going to come out of that. So you cannot talk not about a private person, a single person, or a community to speak against them, to say that community, that shul, the people in that shul, they're not good people. Because he had a bad experience, doesn't give him the permission to go speak against others. So that concludes, more or less. I mean, there's a lot more details that we skipped. I just wanted to give an idea, which I think we've got a pretty good idea of the general rules of Lashon Hara. So I don't know when we started, it's quite a few months ago, this Sefer, but it must have been a whole year already we're studying it. So, Baruch Hashem, we went through it, and next week we'll start, I think, right now I have in mind Maimonides. Unless somebody has a different idea of what book we should study, maybe you can come up, maybe you can study another book, but I think Maimonides will be very relevant and very interesting. Okay, so we got up to last week on a Chumash, on the Torah study, where Yaakov Avinu, we're talking about preparing ourselves for a spiritual lifting up. We have to prepare ourselves. And he, after the whole battle of Shechem, he told everybody to put away their avodah zarah and the clothing they might have that are not proper and the thoughts that are not proper in order to serve God and Beis Kel in Yerushalayim. We discussed last week. Now, he's on his way. Yaakov Avinu, again, is on his way back home. He's been away for over 20 years, running away from his brother Esav. Finally, he's on the way back. He confronted Esav, came through okay with him, and many things are happening on the way back. One significant thing which happened, which could be overlooked if we don't look into Rashi, very significant, and I'll quote the Torah's words. V'atamas Devorah meinekas Rivka. Devorah. Now Devorah, the name Devorah, a woman's name, is mainly known from a Devorah from much later than this Devorah over here. Devorah was a great prophetess, and the book of Judges discusses Devorah. She led the battle against the Jewish enemies. She was a great woman. But there was somebody, Devorah, that was before her, called Devorah, many hundreds of years before. She's Meinekas Rivka, the nursemaid of Rivka, the first one on our glossary sheet. Thomas of Meinekas Rivka. At those times, they used to have nursemaids. There were no bottles. They didn't have bottles that they used to give formula to children, to babies. A mother who would nurse a baby would have somebody helping her that she'd be able to nurse the baby instead of a bottle. A woman who had a baby herself, who keeps the milk coming. And that person who was a nursemaid for that child would stay with them, help bring them up, was like a helper in the house. They became part of the household. And they stayed with them to help them, to teach them as they were growing up. As they got married, they would help them along when they got married. It was like a bond between the Menekas starting off from the beginning, and she stayed with the child until they grew up, and many years later. So, if we remember, Rashi says that this Devorah was Menekas Rivka. She was a nursemaid of Rivka. If we remember before, when Rivka was taken by Eliezer as a wife for Yitzchak, it says that Rivka went and her Menekes with her, and they left Lavan and the Charan, what we spoke about before, from Lavan and Besuel, and they went to Avram Avinu, and she married Yitzchak. And this Menekes went along with her. She was a grown woman already. Well, she was not grown, she was 3 years old. But she was already mature by that time, Rivka. Her Menekes went with her. And if we remember, Rivka told Yaakov when he was running away, run away, Esau wants to kill you, your brother wants to kill you, run away to my brother Lavan, back to her home again. And when the time comes, I'll send a messenger to tell you the coast is clear to come back. The Esau will not bother you anymore. In the meantime, he's angry at you, he hates you, he wants to kill you, run away. When the time comes, I will send a messenger to call you back to come back. So she sent this Devorah, her Menekes, to tell Yaakov, come back. The time has come to come back. And on the way back, she was coming with Yaakov. On the way back, she was a messenger who came back with him to come back to Rivka. On the way back, Vatama, she died. Menekes Rivka. And she was buried on the foot of the mountain of Yerushalayim. V'kroshma alon bochus. Number 2. And they called the name of that place Alon Bochus. Bochus means crying. Now the question is, why would the Torah, which is so careful on its words, tell us this fact, which seems to be very insignificant? Well, a lot of people die. We don't like when people die. It's a tragedy. Great people die. But this Devorah seems to be a very insignificant type of thing over here. So we're told over here that the following. Alon Bochus. Alon means a word, another. Another crying. The Torah is telling us, camouflaging, that there's something more that happened over here. Devorah died, that's true. But there was another tragedy. Alon Bochus, there was another crying. They cried for Devorah that she died, but they cried for somebody else. Who's that somebody else? Rivka. Rivka, the mother of Yaakov. They found the information, the terrible news, that Rivka also died at that time, which is very upsetting, because she's the one who sent Yaakov in the beginning, over 20 years ago, to run away, and she was waiting for him to come back to see him with his whole family. When he ran away, he was a single person. He's coming back with 11 sons and the daughter. She would have so much nachas. Yitzchak and Rivka waiting for him to return, their great son Yaakov. And she died. He wasn't home yet. He didn't get there yet. And they got word, the bad news, that when Devorah died over here with them, Rivka died in Yaakov's homeland under where he's way to go. The question is, why did the Torah conceal this fact? It says the word Alon Bochus, another crying, but it didn't say Rivka died. There was another crying besides, who was this other crying? Our rabbis tell us because they were taught from generation to generation, referring to Rivka. Why was it concealed? So we have in the glossary, Rashi tells us that when she died, who was there to bury her? Rivka, the great Rivka, one of the greatest women of all times, one of the matriarchs of our our grandmother, Rivka, the great tzaddikus who had Yaakov Avinu. Who was there when she died? Yaakov, her son, was not there. He was on the way. Yitzchak, her husband, was blind, sick in the house. He couldn't do anything. He didn't leave the house, Yitzchak, for many years. Avraham Avinu was not living anymore. Sarah wasn't living anymore. So who was going to be the one to take care of her burial, of her funeral? No, he wasn't around anymore, Eliezer. Who was the only one left? Esav. He's the only one left, Esav. Yaakov was not home. Yitzchak was not available. He was old and sick, blind. Avram was not alive anymore. Who's going to come to bury her, to make her funeral? Esav. And they didn't want that to happen, because if Esav comes to bury her, people are going to say, imagine that. We have on our glossary sheet. Halima Yaimaisa, they concealed the day of her death. Shlikalu abris karet shiyotzim min Esav. People should not curse her. This is the mother of Esav. People will curse her. You brought Esav into the world. How could you do it? People tend to, what's her fault? She couldn't help it. He has free choice. But people tend to blame parents for the bad actions of their offspring. And that's not necessarily fair. Sometimes it might be true, but not necessarily so. Certainly not by Rivka. And therefore, they did not want Esav to find out about it. Because Esav would find out that his mother died, he's going to come, and he would say, well, I'm the son. And he'll start commanding and taking over. And people say, Esav? We don't want Esav to come, because people, that's her son, Esav, her son. That she brought into the world. And people will curse her. They'll say, she's terrible. How could you? And therefore, she was too great for that. She was too outstanding to be cursed by the people. And therefore, they kept it quiet. Nobody should know. They buried her quietly. 1, 2, 3. The Esav shouldn't find out about it. They didn't want him to come. And therefore, the Torah is telling us this fact. The Torah conceals it also, to tell us it was concealed. It was not known. We know that she died then, but it was a very quiet funeral, people not to know about it. People, neighbors, the neighbors, friends, people and friends. They're at tzaddikim, b'nei ches, where they lived, but they were foreign people, not her children, they were just b'nei ches. The children of the people that in the city that she lived.
And so her son Yaakov,
They sent a message to him. He was pretty close to home already by now. Close to home, and they sent him a message that she died. He knew about it, that she died. But he was too far. He couldn't get there on time to bury her. The question is, why didn't they curse her when she was alive? Because Esav wasn't around. Esav was living in a different country then. Esav was living in Seir, right next to Israel. He took over a country, Seir, and he was not living together with her. And he's not around, so people out of sight, out of mind. They don't see him. But if he'd come to bury her, then, Esav is here. Who's Esav? Look, that Russia, that terrible person. Imagine if Dr. Mendley's mother died. They want him to come and bury her. So I don't know what kind of mother she was. I don't know what kind of person she was. I don't know what it is. But he's such a terrible, disgusting, they have the right kind of words. Dr. Mengele, such a tyrant, such a cruel person. So he come and he'll bury his mother. It'll be the big bizoyin. It's a disgrace. You have such a son to have it like that. So that's I'm trying to put it in modern terms. It would be a disgrace for Rivka that she has a son Esav. When Yitzchak died, on the other hand, so then the Torah does tell us that he died because Yaakov was there when he died. So Yaakov was there, so he sort of counterbalanced. Even says Esav and Yaakov buried him. We'll see later on when Yitzchak died. Yaakov and Esav buried him. They both came to bury him because Esav was very, very careful with his honoring his parents. But there, Yaakov was there, so people said, well, Esav, but look at Yaakov. So he counterbalanced the anger that people have to Esav, what a terrible person he was, but this is how great Yaakov was. But here, by Rivka, Yaakov was not there. It would only be Esav without Yaakov. The Torah didn't want to tell us. People didn't want to tell, the Torah doesn't want to say. The same way that it was a hidden thing. So, that was another difficult chapter in Yaakov's life. Imagine how upset he was. After all these years, finally, he wants to come back to his mother. That who saved him, would send him away, would save him from Esav. Tell him, run away, because he wants to kill you. Finally, he's coming back with his whole family to give him some nachas. But it didn't come to pass. So they cried, Alum Bochu. So there was another crying. Besides the Oorah, there was a crying for Rivka also. At that time, the Torah pasuk says right afterwards, in number 4, Vayera Elokim El Yaakov Vayivorach Osai. God appeared to Yaakov and he blessed him. What's the blessing over here? Birkas Avelim. It was Menachem Avel. We know that people go to Shiva calls to comfort the mourning. Yaakov was mourning. He heard his mother passed away. He was mourning for his mother. And he got the best kind of comfort. God himself came and comforted him. And from here, one of the reasons why we comfort mourners today, somebody's mourning, God forbid people mourning, we learn from here. Because God himself came to comfort the mourners. And we'll talk about soon more at length, but we're supposed to emulate God, what He does, and He came to comfort the mourners, so that's why we comfort mourners all the generations since then, because God taught us that somebody's mourning, go and try to comfort them. Of course, yes.
How does he appear, Jacob?
He appeared through prophecy. God prophesies to people by talking to them when they're asleep, except for Moses was awake, but they were asleep. He comes to them in a sort of a dream, and he speaks to them.
So he comforted him in a dream.
Yes. Because today, we go into a mourner's house, sometimes you can't tell whether it's a chasana or if it's a mourning house. Sometimes when the people are supposed to comfort mourners, some people don't know what to say. Better if you don't, then maybe not to say anything, but today some people, I even see today, even by Levaya, even by today, I noticed that even by a funeral, it's become people want to make everybody laugh. It becomes like the more you make people laugh, the better the funeral is. It becomes such a opposite feeling of a funeral is supposed to be. Of course, we had the funerals of Meir Koch. That was like a show. Everybody's saying jokes, everything about him. Of course, we're talking about and people, even by more committed people, more religious people, it's become more. I don't know if you noticed it. The funerals I went to lately, people get up and they make jokes, and and we come to the mourner's house. It's like free for all. Everybody's talking and laughing, and it's supposed to be a serious. It's people mourning, and it's just that became such a different kind of feeling in a funeral and mourning. But I'm just off the cuff saying this, but I just because we're discussing it here. So this is where we learn out for ourselves that we comfort the mourning. And very significantly, we have the next pasuk. God said to him, your name is Yaakov. Your name will not be Yaakov any longer. Yisrael will be your name. And he calls his name Yisrael. Now we mentioned this before, that his name was changed by a malach, by the angel. And the angel is begging Yaakov, don't make me say it now. Later God will change your name. No, I want you to do it right now. He forced the angel to change his name. But here was mainly where God came and told Yaakov, your name is no longer Yaakov, your name is Yisrael. But it says both names. Doesn't mean he changed the name altogether. By Avraham, he used to be Avram, which changed to Avraham. And Avram was dropped. We don't call Avram anymore without the hey. Yaakov, we added the name, but the old name is still relevant. We find many of the words in the Holy Scriptures and the prophets where the name Yaakov is used sometimes, the name Yisrael is used sometimes, and there's a reason for it. And Yaakov, what's the difference between Yaakov and Yisrael? We have over here, Yaakov, and Yisrael Shemecha, number 5, your name will no longer be Yaakov, your name will be Yisrael. Now, what is Yaakov? Yaakov, if you remember, Loshan Okev, when he was born, Okev means a foot, a heel, a foot, referring to walking. People use their feet to walk with, right? Yisrael means Sarisa, ruler, Sarisa, a ruler, a moshel. What is the significance of these two names? Esav, on the other hand, we're born together, right? We're twins. Yaakov and Esav. Esav means osui. He is what he is. You're made, and that's what it is. Now, what are these names? What is the significance of these names? These names are really what the world is all about. The Jewish world is all about. the names contain very significant ideas. Yaakov means step, foot, walking, going, accomplishing, not stagnating. A person in this world is born to accomplish, not to stagnate. Esav was as he is. He stayed what he was, as you're born. A person who doesn't work on himself, doesn't strive, will not become a great person. A person that's born, our natural desires, our natural feelings will pull us down. The body of a person is not righteous. Our bodies are lazy. Our bodies like honor. Our bodies are stingy. That's our nature of a person. We have a lot of bad character traits. We have good ones also. We have a lot of bad character traits. And our mission in this world is to overcome them. We mentioned many times already, but it's one of the most important fundamentals of Judaism. Our mission in life is, number one, to control our character traits, and number two, to change our character traits. It's even a higher, much more difficult task and mission we have. And that is a lifetime, many years for a person to work on this, to control and to change. That's very difficult. If we're anger people, to control our anger. If we're very desirous, to control our desires. If we're arrogant, to change our arrogance. To be humble, to be giving, to be benevolent. These are tall orders that God wants us to do, to work on ourselves, to change, become greater people. Esav, so Yaakov means stepping. That means every day of our life, we're supposed to work on ourselves to take the next step, to grow, to advance, to go ahead. Not to be the same person we were yesterday, which faced every day with challenges. Our character traits dictate to us different things for us to do, to think, to say, and we're supposed to control them and not to be lazy but fastidious, not to be stingy but benevolent, not to be stingy, benevolent, not to be lazy, not to be arrogant but to be humble. All these different midas, all different character traits. We have to work on them. We're all faced with day to day with all kinds of different challenges that our character traits push us to do, motivate us to do, and we have to stand up to them and do what's right, what our intellect tells us to do, and not what our character traits dictate for us to do. We're supposed to be control over our character traits, not our character traits to be control over our intellect. And this is the name Yaakov. Yaakov means step by step. From the time he was born, the time he was able to think, he was advancing, walking, going, not stagnating, until he came to the level of Yisrael, ruler. That means he ruled over himself. His intellect ruled over his character traits. He became the Moshe, Yisrael. Many years later, at this point, God said, you went through so much. Still more things to go through. But so far, he went through plenty, Yaakov Avinu. All the different challenges that he had. And he came out victorious because he was working on himself the whole time to do the right thing and not to fall into the hands of the Yetzer Hara of our bad inclination or bad thoughts or bad character traits. God said, you have come to the level of Yisrael. You're a ruler over yourself. Your intellect runs your life, not your character traits, not your anger, and not your stinginess, and not your laziness, and not all the bad character traits. You rule over them. When it's time to be fast, you're fast. When it's time to be slow, you're slow. When it's time to be benevolent, you're benevolent. Time to be cruel sometimes, you have to be cruel. Sometimes you have to be cruel to your children sometimes to tell them the right thing. You have to scold them sometimes. The doctor we always say a doctor has to cut off a person's gangrene foot. They have to be cruel sometimes. Whatever the occasion calls for, you're Yisrael. You are the ruler. Esav, the wicked Esav, the word means asui, the way he is what he is. He said, what do you mean? God created me like this. I should change myself? That's going against God. I want to be wicked. I want to be lazy. And I want to be stingy. And I want to be desirous. And I want to be arrogant. Because that's how I was created. God created me that way. That's how I want to be. The big tzaddik in God. And that is not what God wants us to be. And that's why he changed it for Yaakov. He started as Yaakov, but he used that for his whole life to go, to step, to progress, to go advance, till he came to the level of Yisrael that he became, not only was able to control his character traits, but he changed them. He became a good person. He was not a person of anger anymore, not desirous anymore, and not stingy anymore. He was totally complete. That's the difference between Yaakov and Esav. And that's why he came to this great name of Yisrael. That God told him, now you've reached that point. Even though, look what he went through, so many different problems that he had to face. But that's what we're in this world for, to face problems, overcome problems, and perfect ourselves. And he exactly did that. And we have over here, number 9, one of the most unbelievable words in the Torah that God tells us. Kedoshim tiyu, ki kodesh ani Hashem Elokeichem. You should be holy because I, your God, I'm holy. Imagine that. God says, you should be holy because I'm holy. God, you're God. What do you want from me? It's the name of our God demands from us to emulate him. It's perfection. Are you kidding? How? Yeah, he wants to emulate him. I'm holy, you have to be holy. Maybe not the same level as holiness as God, but he's demanding from us, you're my people, you're the Jewish people. You have to be holy. What does it mean to be holy? Holy means above, separate, above this world, mundane world, the physical world, the world of desires, of world of being into animalistic ideas and thoughts and actions. Holy means just above that. You have a neshama, you have a soul. You have to raise yourself above this mundane world that we live in. I'm holy. God is above this mundane world. He's not into this world. He's above this world. He wants us also to raise ourselves above the mundane world that we live in. And that's actually with the whole bris milah that we have, that God made a covenant, the whole mitzvah of bris milah, that God said He made a covenant with the Jewish people to be, He was a God. The bris milah means that a person's body is so full of wisdom. Every drop of blood is scientists, doctors, they have to work on it, to understand it, to know what is in the drop of blood. So much knowledge, there's chokhmah in one drop of blood. It's unbelievable. The whole body of a person is so full of wisdom. How come it comes to one part of bris milah, the person has to make the bris, to cut off the part of the body that doesn't belong? God couldn't do that also? From the person's head to his feet, full of wisdom. Well, how come that part of a person is missing? He has to, because God wants to tell us that just like your body's not complete, God could have made it complete if He wanted to, but I want you to complete it. The same way we have to complete ourselves in all ways. In our spiritual life, we have to complete ourselves. How? By doing what I said we're talking about till now. That we're born with a lot of different fallacies of things that we're missing, things that we're not great about, things that that we have to bring ourselves higher level of all different character traits that we're talking about. So just like we have to, on our body, our physical body, we have to change, we have to make it perfect. That's how we have to make our whole being perfect. All our midas, character traits, spiritually, to lift ourselves up. God says it's for you to do it. I'm not doing it for you. You came in this world for you to work on yourself and be greater people, holier people, people closer to me. That's our challenge in life. And God says, what's the covenant? To be for you as a God, and I'll be for you as a God. I'll be for you, and you'll be for me. God says, I pledge to be the God of the Jewish people no matter what, no matter thick and thin. I'll stay with them. I expect you also, the Jewish people, thick and thin, to be with me, to do my laws, to do what I tell you to do, even though it might be difficult, even though there are great challenges. But we're inseparable. I will not separate from you, and you cannot separate from me. That was a bris milah. That's a covenant of the bris. When we go to a bris, we have to think about this, that we're going there in order to perfect ourselves, to bring ourselves a higher level, to be closer to Hashem, to make this covenant, that we're supposed to emulate Him. We're supposed to go in His ways. And this was the whole word of Yaakov, the name of Yaakov, that Yaakov got means stepping, going, advancing, growing. That's what Yaakov is all about. Till we come to the level of Yisrael. How to come to that? How do we do that? How? Right? Is it kidding? Yeah, we're not kidding. God demands us to go and emulate His perfection. We have to emulate His perfection. We have to work on ourselves. How do we do that? Well, we spoke about many times before, a few times before, and that's number 12, Hakol Lefi Roiv HaMaseh. According to the amount of times we have to repeat and work on those that we talked about, the Rambam who tells us a person wants to become a benevolent person. You have 60 people to give $1 to, or one person to give $60 to. What should you do? Should you give one person needs $60 for a charity, and 60 people need $1. Should you give it to the person give 60 at one time, or should you give 60 times 1 to each person? If you give to the one with 60, they won't have. If you give it 1 to each one, he won't have. So the Rambam tells us, Chazal tells Hakol Lefi Roiv HaMaseh, we should give 60 times to one person, each person, rather than 160 to one person. Give 60 to 60 people. Why? For this person. Because every time you do it, you are training yourself. You are controlling yourself. You're changing yourself. You do it once, you do it twice, you do it again, and you give charity. And many, many times, even a stingy person will become a benevolent person. Even a person who's stingy, if he keeps repeating the good actions, he will become good. If a person who's a Baal Kas, who's anger, if he controls his anger once, he controls it again, he keeps controlling it, he will eventually lose his whole feeling of anger if he controls it over and over again. It's not easy. Person who's a desirous person, who has all kinds of desires to do things maybe he shouldn't be doing, is overindulging in. The person should be on a diet, and they don't keep their diet, they're eating food that's not good for them. And they're hard for them to stop. If a person will do again and again and again, and keep to it, after a while, he'll be able to full control over himself. That's how the main way that we could become what God wants us to be. And this is what Yaakov means, the old word of Yaakov. Yaakov and Yisrael. Step by step by step, keep controlling it, do it again, keep stepping, go in the right direction. And you will become the ruler after a while. You'll become the moshel over yourself. You will be able to control yourself and change yourself eventually. Not only control, but even to change. And this is something that we see it happening. People who work with others who have these problems. We all have these problems. We call them problems. And we're born with complaints. We're born that way. It's not bad. We're not bad because we have it. We're bad if we don't work on it, if we don't do anything about it. But this is what we're all about. So basically, we've covered our something still left off. Now, bring it out to number 13, a very important thing, but a little late now. And right now, we'll take questions from you or from online. Anybody have any questions?
Rabbi, question for you. You mentioned the 3 names. What is the numerical value of each name, and what is the significance of each numerical value?
I cannot tell you that now. I didn't calculate it. I can't.
So there isn't, but none of the
sure
rabbis.
I'm sure there is a significance to it, but I'm not aware of it.
Because obviously it has a meaning, but you're always telling us how numerical values are very important in words.
True,
but there was nothing significant about these.
I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is. There's so many names, so many words with numerical values. Certain ones I'm aware of, certain ones I'm not aware of.
Okay.
But Yaakov, it's interesting to go over. They're not so simple. A lot of them. They go into very high numbers. Yaakov is 180, 170, 180, 182. It's Kuf Bay base. It's 182, and the Esav goes over 300, and the Israel goes way over. It goes over 500. Israel. So I can't answer that. I wish I could, but I can't answer.
That's okay. Thank you.
If one overcomes his, if one is in control of his character traits, is he overcoming his Yetzer Hara?
Yes, that's part of what we call the Yetzer Hara.
So it can be diminished.
The Rambam tells us Yetzer Hara means character traits. That's certainly called Yetzer Hara. The pulling of a person by his character traits to pull him to do things, to make him earthly, physical, mundane. Those are character traits that are called Yetzer Hara. Also, Yetzer Hara means a spiritual power that pushes and pulls a person also. But the person's body, who was created with these character traits, that's called Yetzer Hara. Yes.
The second question to follow up on that is 6 years I heard of someone that's control of his Yetzer Hara. More or less on the 7th year he's released from it. Is that something true statement?
I never heard that before, but I don't see how that's possible because it depends on how many times he's been faced with his different testing of that type of thing. There's some people that have certain problems when they're older, not when they're younger, because they didn't face it at that time. They didn't face anger maybe sometimes. And when they have children and the children get on the nerves, that's when they're really faced with anger problems. When they're younger, maybe they didn't have any siblings, nobody to get them angry. Or a person who got rich all of a sudden, he has the Nisayan and the test of being benevolent. He didn't have the money till now. Now he got, so I mean, certain things that come up later that depends how many times you're faced with. This is 6 years and that's it. It depends what happened in those 6 years. You can't, I don't believe that is a true statement.
We have a lot of online questions tonight. This is off the topic, which is where we like to go very often. The questioner asked the following. Both my husband and I are unemployed. A good friend of mine asked if I would be interested in a job at her workplace. I have done about 50% of that type of work before, and I am nervous that I am not the right person for the job. I really don't want to say that directly, as then I will totally disqualify myself. Is it ethical to accept the job if it's offered to me? In other words, if they offer her a job that she really thinks she's not that good at, is it ethical to take it and try?
Well, I say 2 parts to that. Number one, if they tell the person hiring them, they tell them that what their experience is, they'll probably be asked by...
Say that. They don't want to mention that because then they'll be totally disqualified in the job. They won't even have the 50% chance that it might work.
Well, I say they wonder what the right thing is. I say the right thing is that you have to be honest. If you feel that you're going to do the job, so then you could take it. But if you're afraid that it's not going to work, So then you have to be honest with the person, tell them your experience, and they have to make a decision. If you feel confident, even though you're not experienced, but you can feel confident. But if I don't want to be disqualified, so what's the question then? I thought they want to be honest about it. So if they want to be honest, so they should leave it up to the person hiring them. If they're being paid, they don't take pay for it, and they're not qualified to take the pay they're being paid. So they shouldn't do that.
Rabbi, I don't want to be the devil's advocate,
Why not?
but what happens now to Esau? He's got 11 uncles and an aunt. So what happens to him? Do they
Nephews and a niece.
yeah. So what happens to him? Is they sit shiva over him and he's no more in the Bible? Is that what happens?
No, till Mashiach comes, Esav. He's our big problem. All his descendants are going in his ways, most of them descendants. From him came Amalek. From him came all the Jewish enemies. Most of them come from Esav. So he's very much alive. Maybe his body himself is not here, but his whole teachings and his whole essence is in his offspring. And they are what's our problem throughout the generations. Esav, the battle of Esav and Yaakov was started in the mother's womb, and that battle is going on. It's still going. Always went on, still going on until Mashiach comes. He's very relevant, Esav. He's not out of the picture at all. No. His offspring, his spirit, and his offspring is there. That's right, absolutely. Hitler comes from Esav, from Amalek. One of his worst offspring is Amalek. Haman came from that. Hitler came from that, no question about it. And every generation, they're here to try to destroy us. But that's all mainly from Esav. Mainly from Esav. We're considered now in the exile of Esav. Since the destruction of the second temple, we're under the rule of Esav, under his influence. And what we're trying to break out of and fight and survive is Esav fighting us all the time.
Okay, there's a question online. I think it needs some context, and I'm going to try to give as much context as I can correctly. Shalom, Rabbi. My question is, this is coming from Eric Eliav. Shalom, Rabbi. My question is, can a Jew join a Masonic lodge, i.e. the Freemasons? Or is there something in their teachings and beliefs that are contrary to Judaism? I don't know if the Rebbe is an expert on Freemasonry.
No.
I'm not an expert on Freemasonry, but I did some research after the question came in a little earlier this evening. It seems that they believe that they don't have many beliefs. They have their basic beliefs are in freedom and equality and helping people and liberty. They use Masonic instruments like the compass and the ruler to teach ethical lessons. Most lodges require a belief in a supreme being of your choice. And they have a holy book, and that which holy book you choose is your choice. So pretty much it sounds like they have a very ecumenical kind of belief system that gives everybody freedom to believe what they'd like.
Except they have those basic principles of what brotherhood, benevolence,
Right.
mentioned.
Right.
Well, I don't see anything really wrong with that. It's not counter anti-Judaism. Judaism, that's where they got it from. They got it from the Torah. All these good things in the world come from the Torah. So and they tell you believe what you want to believe in, and they're not trying to mislead you. So I don't see anything wrong with that. I think maybe there might be better groups to join that might be more inspiring and more Judaism oriented. But I don't see, from what you said now, I don't see anything wrong with belonging to that.
Again, I'm not an expert on the topic. I only know what I
From what
was
you
able
said,
to read what I was
I
able to read in the last few hours.
From what you said, I don't see anything anti-Jewish there.
Any other questions in the room?
Rabbi Mintz, Today is the 8th day of the partial government shutdown. I want to know Rabbi Mintz's thoughts. Is like Hashem sending us a spiritual message? Is there something spiritual we can learn from this?
Well, there could be different ways of looking at it. I think the most elementary way of looking at it, they can have people that are supposed to be outstanding and special, people that the whole country that relies on, and how petty they can become, and how non-responsible they can be by fighting while many people are losing and upset about it, and they can't come to some type of terms. So I think that we're missing some great people up there on top to be able to lead and convince others to do the right thing. That we see that people in the highest places in government, that people are looking up to them for direction, and they are not doing what they should be doing. They're just squabbling over things that should not be trying to force the other person to do things by making the public lose by it. And I think that it's sort of a very reflecting not good on the American nation by the world, that it seems very petty. So I think, you see, even great people are supposed to be in great positions of authority can become very petty, and people can suffer from them. That's what comes to mind, into my mind when I think about it. So we have to learn from that when it comes to very important matters, don't be petty and do the right thing, and don't try to win over the other side. Do what's right, and don't just be there. Called Avas HaNitzuach by the great rabbis. The love for winning literally means people like to win. They have a fight. Of course, a physical fight they like to win, but they have also a verbal fight, or a fight about certain thoughts over different opinions, and people who like to get their opinion to be the one that's accepted, and they love to prove their point and here at the expense of other people, but they obviously to win the other side. So we'll get them this way, and we'll, if we can't win by the whole Obama, whatever they call it, the health insurance, so we'll come from a different angle and force them into it, shut down the government, and they'll force them into. That's not. I don't think it's ethical what they're doing, and we have to learn from that we have to be ethical and be objective and do what's right, and not just to want to win the fight by any means. We have to do what's right and ethically, even though we might be wrong and we might not win the fight, but we have to do what's right. That's the way I look at it.
An online question. Tonight's class begins with the axiom that God is perfect. If God is perfect, or as the questioner asked, shout out to the Bob and Joy Miller of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. If we are to emulate God's perfection, in other words, if God is really perfect, then how can we explain the imperfections in the area of produce and vegetables that farmers and others plant in their gardens? If an item we plant is destroyed and cannot be picked, why does this happen if God is protecting everything? If God is perfect, why is nature imperfect? Or why is produce imperfect?
Well, that question is not produce. How about all people themselves? People that are sick, people that are born with imperfections, and so many different things happening in the world, wars and plagues, and so I don't know why the person is asking by produce. We can look at the whole world as imperfection, but as we know that this world is a world of challenges. And that's the perfection of God, to put us in the world of challenges, for us to overcome the challenges, whether it's for produce, for the farmers that they have to suffer, their produce is not growing like they should, people that are not healthy, people lose a lot of money, and whatever's going on in the world, which is very difficult, that is God's perfection in order for us to overcome the challenges and bring ourselves to higher levels of spirituality, to recognize what we have to do and recognize that God's putting it in our path in order for us to overcome it. So we don't call that imperfection. That's the perfection of God to accomplish His purpose of creation. So if anything that accomplishes His purpose of creation is called perfection.
Questions in the room?
Oh, here we go.
Run away.
Rabbi, in regards to that last question, when we say the Baruch Berena Fashis Rabbis, if
Yes.
I remember the translation, Blessed Hashem God, King Universe, creates all those numerous creatures with deficiencies for the life of
Deficiencies?
Yeah. I think when you look at the art scroll,
And people's deficiencies.
what says creatures?
So when they're people's deficiencies, rabbis, and what they need, what they're missing. God creates the people in the world, and He created that which they are missing. In other words, they're missing food. He creates the food. He didn't create deficiency. He made what they're deficient in. He created. That's what it means.
Okay, online from Dasi Deer. Let me get straight to it. It says Hashem created Adam and Chava, but what was there before the world was created, and who created Hashem?
Well, nobody created Hashem. Hashem is a kadmoin. Hashem was always there. It's something we cannot understand. But we can understand if a person is an atheist, he can understand either what was there from before. What's the beginning of time? We can understand what's the beginning of time. So it's something that we can't understand the thing without a beginning. But God doesn't have a beginning. He was not created. He was always there. He was not created. What was before the world was created, the world was just nothing. There was nothing around. There was nothing. God was in the world, but nothing else was in the world. What that looked like exactly, we don't know. But there was no creation before simply talking, and we can't imagine what it was, because we're creations of God, and we're in the world of creation, so it's hard to imagine what the world without creation is. But there was nothing before, only God by Himself. Even angels were created. They were not there before. God by Himself was there.
It's not that we just can't understand it. Is that what Rabbi Mintz is saying?
We can understand being a kadmoin, being something always there. But people say, well, how can God possible and God always be there? So I said, well, how can anything always be there? But if a person atheist also, something, what's the beginning of time? It's something we can't understand. What's the beginning? Just so we can't understand space. Where's the end of space? God has no limits. A person, an atheist, so where are the limits of the world? There's no limits. They go further and further. So how far does it go? Something beyond our understanding. Time and space is beyond our understanding.
Anybody in the room? No? Go to the last online question. Did anybody ever achieve perfection? Any human being?
Yes. I see your wife. She's not here now. Yeah. Yes. People have received perfection, but it's what you call perfection. The Rambam, which I hope to start studying next week, not to start off with. We're still going to continue with our Chumash. But the Rambam says that every person can be a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu. A person can be as righteous as Moses was. And the question is, how can a person be like Moses? The Torah says nobody was like Moses. We just read it a few weeks ago in Simchas Torah. The Torah says that nobody was like Moses in the world. The answer is there was no prophet like Moses, but a tzaddik can be like Moses, a righteous person. Everybody who reaches their potential is perfect in their own way. They're not God. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't God either. He reached God's level. But he reached the level as high as he was able to reach. That's called perfection. Everybody who does and accomplishes what they're supposed to accomplish in this world is called perfection. And therefore, there were people who reached that perfection. Moses and everybody who followed him, who used everything that God gave us, all the talents and the physical possibilities, spiritual possibilities that we're able to come to. So if we use that to its full extent, we're called perfect. We're perfect in our own way. We're maybe not as great as Moses was, but that just makes a difference. Mainly was we reached the perfection what God wanted to put us in this world to do. That's called perfect. And there were many people who reached that. Not too many, but there was people who used everything God gave them to the fullest extent, and therefore they're called perfect. Yeah, that's what the Rambam says. Everybody can be not a prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu, not a wise man like Moshe Rabbeinu, and not a close to God like Moshe Rabbeinu like Moses, but to use everything that you have to the fullest extent that we can all do. He did it, we can also do it. We won't reach the same levels that he did, but so what? But we reached what God wants us to reach, and that's called perfect. That's it. Okay, everybody, hope to see you next week again, and we'll go further.